and Vanguard. It's fascinating to have this chance to speak to you from my prison cell, because I know we have a lot in common. I'm sure you want, just as I want, the aims of Extinction Rebellion to succeed, for all the beautiful kinds of life on Earth to survive and flourish, and that includes human life and all the vibrant human cultures around the world. We all feel that upwelling of sentiment at the end of a David Attenborough documentary. The problems arise when this desire comes into contact with your day-to-day business. I expect you might say that you have no control over how the business works, not systemically. You must make decisions which maximize profits for your shareholders. To do that, you must serve your clients by maximizing their profits. If you don't do it, then you'll be replaced. I get that. I've worked for 17 years as a civil engineer, and I know that to win a contract and make a profit, I need to design the cheapest bridge possible, meeting the standards. Otherwise, someone else will get the contract. One of the good things about prison is that I've had plenty of time to read and reflect. One of the most interesting books I've read is written by David Graeber. It's titled Debt, The First 5,000 Years. I'm haunted by his analysis of one particular historical episode. That is the conquest of Mexico by Cortez in 1521. The conquistadors, as they were known. Through this, I will liberally borrow Graeber's words. I'm sure that if he were still with us, he would delight in being plagiarized by a political prisoner. What I find surprisingly prosaic in Cortez's story is that he embarked on that expedition because he was deeply in debt. One of his companions wrote that around this time, quote, he began to adorn himself and be more careful of his appearance than before. He wore a plume of feathers with a medallion and a gold chain and a velvet cloak trimmed with loops of gold. In fact, he looked like a bold and gallant captain. However, he had no money to defray the expenses I've spoken about, for at the time he was very poor and much in debt, despite the fact that he had a good estate of Indians and was getting gold from the mines. But all of this he spent on his person, on finery for his wife, and on entertaining guests. When some merchant friends of his heard that he had obtained his command as Captain General, they lent him 4,000 gold pesos in coin. End quote. Graeber writes, in other words, he'd been living beyond his means, got himself into trouble, and decided, like a reckless gambler, to double down and go for broke. On landing, he burned his boats, effectively staking everything on victory. 3 years later, through some of the most ingenious, ruthless, brilliant, and utterly dishonorable behavior by a military leader ever recorded, Cortez had his victory. After 8 months of grueling house-to-house warfare and the death of perhaps 100,000 Aztecs, Tenochtitlan, one of the greatest cities of the world, lay entirely destroyed. The imperial treasury was secured. Cortez then stiffed all his own soldiers, cheating and swindling them out of their promised share of the spoils. The soldiers all emerged very deeply in debt from the enterprise. It didn't end well for Cortez either. Despite sitting on a mountain of blood-soaked gold, he somehow found new debts which gobbled up his fortune, and within 5 years he had to flee as a penniless debtor. This was one episode in a continent-wide genocide and theft. A contemporary wrote of 10 plagues on the people of Mexico. Quote, the 9th plague was the service in the mines, to which the heavily laden Indians traveled 60 leagues or more to carry provisions. When their food gave out, they died, either at the mines or on the road. The bodies of those Indians and of the slaves who died in the mines produced such a stench that it caused a pestilence, especially at the mines of Oaxaca. For half a league around these mines and all along the great part of the road, you could scarcely avoid walking over dead bodies or bones. And the flocks of birds and crows that came to fatten themselves upon the corpses were so numerous that they darkened the sun. End quote. genocide. Why? The king was deeply in debt to banking firms in Florence, Genoa, Naples. He desperately needed the river of silver and gold to continue flowing from the Americas to keep his creditors at bay. At all levels of this tragedy, from the foot soldiers to the king, as Graeber writes, we are not dealing with a psychology of cold, calculating greed, but of a much more complicated mix of shame, righteous indignation, and of the frantic urgency of debts that would only compound and accumulate. These were almost certainly interest-bearing loans. At key moments, those making the decisions did not feel they were in control of events. Those who were in control did not particularly care to know the details. That is, the European financiers backing up the King of Spain. Now, why have I told you this story? Because with 500 years of hindsight, the actions of Cortes, his soldiers, and the King of Spain are all obviously abhorrent and vile, the depths of human cruelty. Yet some essential features of this tragedy apply today. That is that for the debtor, the world is reduced to a collection of potential dangers, potential tools, and potential merchandise. Even human relations become a matter of cost-benefit calculation. Clearly, this is the way the conquistadors viewed the world that they set out to conquer. This is a peculiar feature of modern capitalism, to create social arrangements that essentially force us to think this way. The structure of corporations is designed to eliminate all moral imperatives but profit. Thus, today, you feel that you do not have any control over events. What are the obvious parallels today? When you arrange finance for Shell Corporation to extract yet more fossil fuels, you are enabling an activity which will render large swathes of the world uninhabitable through global warming. That process has already begun, and millions are already dying every year in the tropics, mostly through starvation and communicable diseases, mostly children. When a continent becomes uninhabitable through heat, drought, famine, flood, 1 billion people can't calmly get up and go somewhere else. There will be many long roads strewn with corpses, like the roads to the Oaxaca mines, only with far fewer carrion birds, because nature will have utterly collapsed in these sacrifice zones. Don't be like Cortez's merchant friends and finance his next extractive expedition. Then it was gold and silver being extracted from the hills. Now it is oil and gas drilled out of the seafloor. Although your Cortes will present you with diverse alternative ventures, all ingenious, ruthless, and brilliant, to rip up the earth for other precious metals, to build a renewably powered utopia, to carry on infinite economic growth on a finite planet. Though the end results will be the same, vulnerable people dying in the mines, but these will be cobalt and lithium mines, or in the poisoned waters leaching downstream of those mines. Don't be that distant European financier, the one actually having some control over events but who doesn't care to know the details. How will the debtor deliver the next interest payment on their loan? The details are drought-ravaged landscapes, burned forests, poisoned rivers, and human misery. You must care to know the details. However, your shareholders and clients will continue demanding profits, for their debts will never stop accumulating. We all have to pay our debts, right? I don't pretend to have immediate answers. Don't ask you to read Graeber and Thomas Piketty, and Charles Eisenstein has some beautiful ideas in his book Sacred Economics. Today I only ask you to remember that as you face this wicked dilemma, that all of this has happened before, and the horrors were perpetuated by people no different to you or I, people responding to the exigencies of their circumstances. In hindsight, it seems obvious that Cortes couldn't have decided not to extract blood-soaked gold to pay his debts. He would have lost his honor as a warrior, his social status. He would have faced shame, penury, perhaps death as prison. He felt he felt compelled to act as he did, but you can see that the compulsion truly came from inside him, from his own ego. It was a failure of his humility, a failure to empathize with those who would suffer. But karma was a bitch. A few years later, he suffered all of this anyway. As we do unto others, so we do unto ourselves. Like Cortez, you do have a choice today, although you feel a great force on your will. All of us who have the time and space to understand this need to look very carefully at ourselves. Many people do not have this time and space because of the pressing demands of survival. If you're listening to this, you probably have this heightened responsibility. Once you've acknowledged that you are free and that you have choices, you can ask yourself, what do I want to act in service of? Perhaps try contemplating the truth that you were brought into this world tiny and helpless, and you've been given everything you've ever needed to flourish. That is a debt which you can never repay. Now with that in mind, ask yourself, do we all need to pay our debts?